We're ready for our types of angles lesson. This is the first one in our geometry unit. It's going to be the first part of geometry here. And we're going to quickly review some vocabulary you probably remember from elementary school, and then we'll get to some new stuff that you haven't seen. I gave you a guided notes page. Already got the title up top, so you know which one it is. Up in the top right-hand corner, I want you to make sure you fill in your information, your name, class period, and the date that you're watching this. And then our essential question, what are the different types of angles and their relation to each other? You'll notice over to the left, I have put in some questions that are going to go along with what you're filling in, and you're going to take all your notes over on the right-hand side. I've given you the big main ideas over here, and then you're going to fill in your definitions and examples as we go. So our first one is an angle. An angle is formed by two rays. So a good way of thinking of a ray is it's basically just a line with an arrowhead at one point of it that meet at a common endpoint called a vertex. So if I have a ray going this way and then another one going this way, they meet at the vertex, that point, and form an angle in between the two of them. An important one is going to be something called congruent angles. And this is going to be a big part of this lesson, the next lesson, even into our third lesson of this unit. Congruent means angles that have the same measure, or think of them as they're kind of equal to each other. So we would say angle 1, so that's our notation for an angle, is congruent to angle 2. So congruent means it's the same measurement and the same size. It's exactly the same. So the congruent symbol looks something like this. It's an equal sign and the little mark up top. And we'll learn later on what that little mark was, but it means that they're similar, meaning the same shape. Equal means the same size, so same shape and size. But that symbol means that they are congruent. And in our case, it means the measure of the angles are the same. Now we have two newer terms. We have adjacent angles and vertical angles. Adjacent angles are angles that share a side. They're next to each other. Vertical angles are angles that are directly across from each other when two lines intersect. So each one has its own kind of look to it and its own kind of way of finding it. So let's start with our vertical angles over here. Angles that are directly across from each other are vertical angles. So we would say that angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles. But notice what it says, vertical angles are congruent. And we'll explore this a little bit more in our next video. But these two angles that are directly across from each other have the exact same measurement. So we would say angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. If I know that angle 1 is, say, 110 degrees, I know that angle 3 is also going to be 110 degrees. If I know one, I know the other. Same goes with angle 2 and angle 4. Sorry, that was a really bad angle measure. These are vertical angles. They're directly across from each other. So we know that angle 2 and angle 4 are going to be congruent to each other as well. So look directly across the intersection there of those two lines, and that's where you're going to find your congruent angles. So maybe angle 2 was 70 degrees. That means we know that angle 4 is also going to be 70 degrees. Let's go back to our adjacent angles. Two angles that share a side. They're next to each other. So think of it as this angle here and this angle here. They share this common edge, so we call those adjacent angles. They're next to each other. Think of them as they're touching. They share a side. But what we have to be careful of is sometimes they're not going to be numbered like they were over for vertical angles. So we're going to have to be able to name an angle. We're going to have to be able to use proper notation to tell the angle we want. So say we want this angle here. To name an angle, basically think of it as how would you draw that angle? I'd go from A to C to B. So we could call this angle A, C, B. Basically the three letters kind of draw the edges of that angle. This one here would be B, C, D. So angle B, C, D is our other angle. These two angles we would be considered adjacent because they share that common edge and meet at that vertex there. So adjacent angles are touching each other. Vertical angles are directly across from each other. They don't share a side at all. The only thing they share is that vertex in the middle. So adjacent is next to, vertical is directly across from each other. Now, a quick review. This should be something you remember from elementary school when you've talked about angles, but we're going to review them real quick, so get your definitions in there. An acute angle is an angle that's less than 90 degrees. So I think of them as cute little angles. They're less than 90 degrees. A right angle is equal to 90 degrees. So a right angle is a perfect right corner, or as close as I can get it. Think of the corner of a sheet of paper as a good way of measuring a right angle. You're often going to see this little notation here. That's telling you it is exactly 90 degrees. It is a right angle. An obtuse angle is an angle greater than 90 degrees, but less than 180. So think of it as a wide open angle. So maybe it looks something like this. Big and wide open. It's wider open than a 90-degree angle. And then we have a straight angle. Angle that's equal to 180 degrees. Basically think of it as it's a straight line. So one side goes this way, the other side goes exactly in the opposite direction. So it's this big, wide open angle that's equal to 180 degrees, or a straight line. And again, these should all be things that you remember from elementary school. Acute is the tiny little ones, less than 90 degrees. A right is exactly 90 degrees. Obtuse is a big, wide open one. It's greater than 90. And a straight angle is a straight line, meaning it's equal to 180 degrees. So you should have these three examples there in your notes. Let's go ahead and name them and then describe what type of angle it is. So by name, we can name it two ways. If there's something inside of the angle, we could call it angle 2. Or if we want to do the proper way, we name it going along the edges. So we go from A to B to C. So we could call it angle A, B, C. You can also go in reverse. You can go B, or C, B, A. But it's basically describing those 3 points that that angle passes through. And then what type of angle is it? Well, the dead giveaway is that right angle symbol right there. It's saying that this is a right angle, meaning it's exactly equal to 180 degrees. How about our next one? So let's name it. Well, we're looking at this angle here, so we can name that angle 3. Or if we want to name it by its points, it goes from R to S to T. Think of it as drawing a line. You're giving it directions on how to draw. Go from R to S to T. Then let's tell what kind of angle it is. It's a big, wide open angle. Basically think of right here would be your 90 degrees. It's past 90 degrees. It's wider open. So we would call this an obtuse angle. And then here, we can call it a couple things. We could call it angle 4, or we could name it. It goes from N to M to L, or you can go the other way, L to M to N. So we can call it angle L, M, N. We're naming it by its points, but it takes all 3 of those to name it. And then what do we call a big angle that's basically exactly a straight line? Well, that's called a straight angle. So I just want you to get back in the habit of being able to identify those by their looks. And then we have 2 last pieces of vocabulary for us. These are probably going to be new for you. Complementary angles. These are angles whose sum is 90 degrees. They form a right angle. So angle 1 and angle 2 together form a right angle. If you think of their outside edges, go together and form a right angle. Meaning they have to add up to be 90 degrees. So maybe this one is 65 degrees. Well, that means this one has to be 25 degrees. Because 65 plus 25 is equal to 90 degrees. They form that right angle, so they have to add up to be 90 degrees. Supplementary angles are 2 angles whose sum is 180 degrees, or they form a straight angle or a straight line. And here's how I remember the difference between them. Complementary, C comes before S, 90 comes before 180. That's how I kind of keep the 2 of them straight. But if I look, I want this angle here plus this angle here. And if I look at their outside edges, they create a straight line. So I know that they're a pair of supplementary angles. So let's say angle 4 is 50 degrees. Well, what would I add to 50 to get to 180, because it makes a straight angle? Well, I would have to be 130 degrees, because 130 plus 50 gives me 180 degrees. So complementary are two angles that add up to be exactly 90. Supplementary are two angles that add up to be 180. So let's put it to use. Really all we're looking at is what do they add up to be, and do they hit one of those magic targets. So 60 and 30. Notice they're not drawn together, so we don't know what they look like together, but we know what they add up to be. 60 plus 30 is 90, so that means it's a complementary pair of angles. Here I have 85 plus 90. 85 plus 90 is 175 degrees. It's not 90, it's not 180, so we would say this one is neither. Doesn't hit either one of those magic numbers. So how about down here? 75 plus 15 equals 90 degrees. So as long as they add up to be exactly 90 degrees, we would call them complementary. And then here, 135 plus 45. Well, if I add those two together, I get exactly 180 degrees, which makes these two angles supplementary. So that's what we're looking for. Two angles that add up to be exactly 180 or exactly 90. That's our complementary or our supplementary. So lots of vocabulary. We'll have a chance to use it on our next activity, but at least now you've seen all of it in action.